Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Armley, Vice President of Customer Success for ESG. The Customer Success is a service company. A big thank you to all of you in the audience for joining us today for ESG's webinar series, Customer Success Unlocked. I'll be the guest host today, sitting in for the talented Marley Wagner, VP of Marketing for ESG. I appreciate your patience and understanding as I attempt to reach her lofty heights and skills for interviewing. I need to also call out our colleague, Sheikh Ayub, VP of Business Development for ESG, who's leveraged his long-standing relationships with today's guests to secure their time and participation. The topic for today is nurturing employee success in customer success. Before I introduce our guest and before we start into our conversation, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First, I'd like to remind everyone that we are recording this session, and a link to the recording will be made available to you within 24 hours of the webinar. Second, because we hope this webinar can be somewhat interactive between speakers and audience, we invite you to submit your questions throughout via the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen. Depending on how the conversation rolls, we might take questions before the Q&A portion if the question fits that moment of conversation. In any case, we'll get to as many questions as possible during the Q&A at the end, which will be about roughly 15 minutes. Now, to the topic. I think I can speak for a great many leaders in business today that the increasing attention being paid to the idea of employee success is very much welcomed. Really, who doesn't want employees who are engaged because they are feeling successful in their role in one form or another? I believe that most leaders understand the connection between the success of employees and the success of the company's customers. That connection appeals not just to our sense of shared humanity, decency and respect are good things, but also to a very basic understanding and appreciation for how good business is sustained and how it grows. Growing the ability for customers to be successful is a straight line to revenue expansion. And the kicker to all of this is making sure that the employees that design, build, deliver, and support products and services for customers are highly engaged in their roles. This is not just a leadership challenge and opportunity. It should also be a very high priority of business leaders. Finally, does being in a role in a customer success business function mean anything unique in the context of employee success? Are there special considerations? So that's the setup. Now I'd like to introduce you to two individuals who hold the kind of positions in their respective companies that afford them opportunities to significantly influence employee success. Both work for companies that are extremely well known to everyone on this call. And so we can cut to the chase and ask each of them to say a few words about themselves. Jim Mercer, Global Head of Customer Success at Zoom. Let's start with you.
Great, appreciate that, Peter, and just really appreciate the time today. As Peter mentioned, Jim Mercer here, Head of Customer Success here at Zoom. Been here roughly 6.5 years, and prior to that, it seems like a lifetime ago, but 16 plus years at a company called Citrix. I'll just speak for myself, but I know I'm speaking for the others. Perry, Peter, and myself, just really honored to be a part of this topic. In most, if not all regards, these are topics that we by no means are the experts on. It's more of a conversation. I feel like we're all works in progress as it relates to the evolution of what it truly means to ensure not just our customers are happy, but that our employees are inspired and are happy as well. And to me, that's that silver bullet. I think more so than anything, if I'm guilty of one thing, I'm obsessed about our folks. That's precisely why I'm here today.
Thank you very much, Jim. Perry Monaco, Head of S&B and Scaled Customer Success at LinkedIn. How about you? What are you all about?
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. Good to virtually see everyone. I am Canadian, so I'll apologize in advance for my accent if I say anything that sounds a little bit out of the ordinary. Peter will understand what I'm saying, but that
I'll translate.
Yeah, just pop it in the chat there. Before I get started, my pronouns are he and him, and thanks for taking the time to be with us today. Employee wellness, employee engagement, all sorts of different things that revolve around the employee are incredibly important to not only my employer, but to me personally. It just is really what is the thing that is top of mind for me in great times, let alone when we're in a pandemic. I've been afforded the opportunity to be at LinkedIn for coming up to 11 years now. I was in customer success at LinkedIn as an individual contributor before we were called customer success. I think probably before we knew what customer success really was. I've grown into this global leadership role that I now have, managing a team of CSMs and analysts around the world. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I think all three of us are incredibly passionate about the people that we work with, and know that we set the stage for a lot of what their career journey is all about.
Thanks, Perry. Yeah, and I guess for myself, yeah, I've been in leadership roles for the better part of 24 years now, off and on, individual contributor and leadership. And so this first question I want to ask each of you, and I guess we'll start with Jim. And you kind of each touched on it a little bit in your introductions, but do you have a general philosophy in life around how you interact with people, and whether that philosophy is something you consciously tap into as a leader of teams?
You worded that in an interesting way, Peter. That is not necessarily confining it to work. That is, how do you interact with people? Is there a general philosophy? And I feel like that's very aptly put in that, look, it's at the end of the day, and this, the pandemic's a great example of this, right? Where, the lines between, work life, home life are incredibly blurred, if there is a line anymore. And just thinking about what it truly means to really tap into, I mentioned this, happiness thing in my intro, but, literally as it relates to one of Zoom's mantra around being obsessed about delivering customer happiness, it truly starts with our teams, Perry's team, your team, Peter. And it's kind of a daunting ask when you think about it, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no, hours of operation per se. There's no 9 to 5 to it. And when you really think about it or obsess about it, like I tend to do, it's really a daunting ask of our folks that are truly, truly loyal to our teammates and to themselves and to our customers. So what that really means, and I feel like us as leaders have a unique opportunity to truly walk the walk, right? Live a life in someone's shoes. What that sustainability factor looks like as it relates to truly what a happy LinkedIn customer looks like, or a Zoom customer, and really transcend that day-to-day just customer experience from a reactive standpoint, and to truly how we proactively delight our customers. And that's kind of, I guess, if I were to wrap that up into a philosophy, I'm not quite sure if there's a neat and tidy label for it. But it revolves around, and we'll probably get to this in a little bit, but deliberate and purposeful engagement with our own folks, and truly really transcending some of the day-to-day fires, whether you're a part of a rapid growth company, or wanting to achieve certain initiatives or KPIs or whatever the case may be. Oftentimes that human element is lost in the mix. So if you were to ask my direct reports, all too often I am bringing things back to just the simple human element as far as the sustainability factor. Are our folks happy in their roles? If not, like, what would make them happy? Have we asked these open-ended questions that truly might make a difference that the typical day-to-day manager wouldn't be asking? So
that's really good. I mean, philosophies are kind of, like, by definition, kind of frameworks or loose kind of definitions of how things can be. And I think the way you describe that is good. I don't think anyone expects Jim Mercer to be a perfect human being, even if he might aspire to be one. And so you just try to be mindful, right? I think in the way you work with people, you interact with people, and the way you think about leading them. Perry, any thoughts for yourself on, are you kind of purposeful in terms of applying kind of general principles of how you live to lead?
Yeah, I've got two examples, Peter, and I can't agree with Jim more. This whole concept of it sounds, saying it out loud or hearing it in my head, it doesn't sound as impactful as when I heard Jim say it. But just recognizing the fact that we're working with human beings, right? Like, we're all human, and working with human beings really should just challenge us to make sure that we're treating each other as human beings, right? And so the two elements here that I'd like to just highlight is I lead with kindness. For me, kindness is something that is incredibly important. It's also a scientific, something you can scientifically measure the impact that it has on your physiology and what it does to you in a positive way. And so simple little things like making sure that I'm using the right words whenever I can, being conscious about what I'm saying, but also how I'm saying it. And in the past, I actually tried to make it really part of the culture of the team. I actually ran a kindness challenge where I asked people to be mindful of opportunities in their day-to-day, both at work and outside of work, where they could be kind to one another. And then we, of course, being a tech company, we asked them to log it. And so really the reason for getting them to write it down or to put it into a form was to sort of be able to get to a point where we could understand what the impact of that kindness was. And so over the course of a month, we had just amazing results as it related to the way in which people interacted with one another at work, but also outside of the office. And we heard some really great stories. I mean, remember, these are like adults that I'm working with, or we're all working with. And there was a moment during that challenge where there was flu shots being offered in the Chicago office. And one of the stories that really touched me that I still remember today is a woman who sat beside somebody else. They were talking about getting the flu shot, and one person was incredibly nervous about getting needles and didn't want to do so. I wonder how they're doing today with all of the vaccines and stuff that we're up against today. But remembering the challenge, the one woman offered to go with her to get her flu shot, and she held her hand during that moment. And it was just heartwarming to hear that, people, when you're conscious of the opportunity to be kind, it just brings out, good, it makes good people even better. And so I try and do the same thing in terms of leading with kindness. The other thing is during a lot of the last couple of years, certainly my journey as an ally has accelerated, and I've learned a whole lot in the light of a lot of the social unrest that has happened in the world. And I used to acknowledge, I still do, obviously I've changed teams recently, so that's why I'm talking about a lot of things in the past. But I would call out and sort of acknowledge some of the things that were happening in the world, and offer to give people space or the opportunity to talk and or be heard. And one piece of feedback I received from an individual was, it's really, really great to hear a leader talk about these issues, but what would be more important for us to understand is, what are you doing about it? And that was something that really challenged me to say, okay, maybe they didn't say this, but maybe words are cheap. And so what are the actions that you're taking? And so I would frequently tell the story about how I would have, I have dinner with my family virtually every night now. So I would talk about, the conversations we had at dinner with my young children around the things that were happening in the world, and what the outcomes of those conversations were, how we handled it. And the individuals on my team really appreciated that. And again, it created a greater sense of belonging, because not only was I talking about the issues at work, but I was also talking about the issues at home. So to sum up, I think, leading with kindness, being that trying to remember that empathy is incredibly powerful, and to just try and lead with the best example that you can. But to your point at the beginning, I know that you're being somewhat playful there, but we are human, we aren't perfect. So, making sure that, we're at least trying our best. We may make mistakes, but putting the best foot forward is a lot of time the best action that we could possibly take.
Yeah, and I think that point you made, I think it's a struggle for many leaders today more than ever, I think, to as you say, kind of walk the talk. It's not in our nature sometimes to step out of the role of a business leader and kind of vocalize your thoughts and views on social matters, because people believe you're in the business world, you should just be talking about business. And yet, as happening today, I mean, let's call it out. I mean, there's a war happening in Eastern Europe, and that's extremely upsetting for probably almost everybody. And so it's not good for a leader to have a meeting and just ignore it. I think you have to actually state that that's happening. You don't have to offer, deep personal opinions about it, but I think it's just important to acknowledge it, that it's affecting people to varying extents. And so I think that's really great that you, Perry, are trying to kind of leave a mark as a leader by really demonstrating kind of compassion and empathy. And I've seen you present, by the way, a number of times over the years, and it feels like to me, I don't know you, we don't really know each other that well, but we've met. I've seen you present. You have this way of kind of disarming the audience with humor and fun. And I think that's a way to lead, frankly. And I imagine if you're leading your organization, sometimes you sprinkle that kind of stuff into your business meetings, and they probably appreciate that. Next question is pretty specific, and it's really the focus of this conversation is really about customer success and whether, as a business function, customer success and the collection of roles that comprise customer success, does that present unique challenges and opportunities for leaders compared to, as you might think, business functions like sales, marketing, and support? If maybe you've already had experience in those roles, or maybe you can kind of comment, do you think customer success offers particular kind of challenges and opportunities when it comes to employee success? And I'll go back to Jim again, sorry.
No, it's great question. And I think, man, this may take the rest of the session. I'm not sure, Perry, but that is a good problem to have, right? But yeah, I would say, yeah, for sure. When you think about, as most, if not all of you are aware and are living and breathing this today, the opportunities as it relates to role diversity underneath the customer success umbrella, as it were, can be quite broad depending how your teams are structured and or will evolve to. And it's not just about, a free for all, ragtag team of CSMs, as it were, that you're just, out there without a strategy, helping customers be better at what they do, but really thinking about, some of the, just relevant to me in our current situation here at Zoom, just really growing, in my time here from literally one employee to the 400 plus that we're now at as a global customer success org. If I were to kind of sum it up into some of the main buckets that we emphasize as it relates to the really important roles beyond just the day-to-day CSM type work, I can't overemphasize enough the need and or the importance of customer success operations. And when you think about the why around that, really as it relates to just a rapid growth company, and this is not unique to Zoom, by the way, but just rapid growth companies in general, the importance of process, tools, integrations to ensure those things are working together. But not just that, right? Planning and headcount strategies, partnering with finance is certainly super important. And it's not just about throwing headcount at problems. It's really fine-tuning and looking at data analytics around, are these ratios right? Really challenging the status quo as it relates to what we did, in years or quarters prior, and really ensuring that we're honing our craft, even around things like our mass market strategy. Are we, using automation wherever possible? Is it data driven enough, and those sorts of things? Not to mention, other go-to-market strategies around, NPI, both internally and externally around new product introduction. Internal enablement, right? We've just kind of talked about, like, as it relates to our own employee success, part of that comes from the evolution and growth of our own folks. Do we have a plan for that? Not just personally, but professionally. LinkedIn Learning, hello, like this is something that we're doubling down on, things of that nature. But even beyond that, think about just the roles along the customer journey. We talked a little bit about CSM, of course, but in that land and adopt phase, thinking about, customer training and enablement. Super important, especially around specialized roles as it relates to, product offerings and things of that nature. CSMs in general, think about segmentation strategies too. I think it, kind of going back to a prior comment of mine around throwing headcount at problems, which can tend to be some of the first knee-jerk reaction to, growing quickly. Ensuring that we have the right strategies in place has been super important for us around the different segments. And I'm not just talking, traditional enterprise and mass market as it relates to SMB and those sorts of things, but looking at, laser focus within education, healthcare, public sector, things of that nature. Use cases are vast and disparate, and despite having an easy to use product, whether it's Zoom or LinkedIn or wherever you may be, use cases and being tapped into those is certainly super important as it relates to being that trusted advisor of the long haul and really evolving our programs as it relates to even things like our outbound strategy, which will continually evolve. And then, not least of which, something that we've doubled down on and emphasized here is, dedicated teams around the retention and renewal piece, and having a collaborative effort between our renewal counterparts, CSM, all underneath the customer success umbrella, truly partnering with our sales leadership and our folks on the front lines, just to ensure that we have proactive engagement strategies built on, data, of course, but really predicated on that customer lifecycle. And hopefully, perfect world type of scenario that, the renewal piece and the account growth is almost like a non-event, right? If we're that tuned into and have that right pulse of our customer. So when you think about some of my ramblings over the course of the last couple of minutes, it really encapsulates the different roles and responsibilities. And again, this is not unique to Zoom whatsoever, but it's, customer success as a whole is from a role diversity standpoint, there's a kaleidoscope of options there that are truly, in my mind, kind of inspiring and somewhat unique to customer success. And not to you mentioned, marketing and sales and whatnot. Of course, there's different roles within each of those verticals as well. But to your point, I feel like there are unique challenges that lie there within that is not, there can't be a cookie cutter approach to some of those efforts around, employee enablement, ensuring the success of our folks, professional growth, what that means to them, because professional growth can mean certain things to different people. It's not just, climbing the ladder, as it were, it's fulfillment within the existing role, and how that might look like to different people is certainly different. So those are the things that really resonate in my mind when you ask that, Peter. Hopefully that helps a little bit, but again, just to kind of sum up there, it's just a lot of role diversity and a lot of opportunity for sure.
So congratulations, Jim. I think you just chased away a lot of aspiring leaders who thought the role would be easy. I think before I pass it off to Perry, I just want to say, I think where you're really, for me, what I pulled away from that was leaders need to be really great communicators. You need to really orchestrate communication as kind of like this constant thread of transparency to really engage people in their roles. And I'm a believer that people get up in the morning and want to do a good job. They don't get up believing I'm just going to go in and slack off. I think that everyone has good intentions of doing the job, and the best way to do the job is understanding what it's all about, and so that they can fulfill the expectations. So I think what you're describing, Jim, is that complex environment to make that happen. Perry, thoughts on this? Is there a distinction, or is customer success unique in that way compared to other kind of functions?
I think so. I think it's distinct, but I also think that part of the other issue at hand here, in addition to all the great points that Jim made, is that it's still a relatively new industry, right? I mean, like at best, we're maybe in high school at this point in time, and who didn't have an awkward high school experience? So I think that a lot of what Jim is describing, and what I think that I will add on here is a result of some of the awkward phases that this industry is going through, because it is relatively new. And we're still trying to figure, like the industry itself is still trying to figure out a little bit of its place, who we are, what we aren't, similar to, what we were trying to do in high school. Some of us are still trying to do this at 45. I would say the two things that I thought of when I got this question in advance, I guess I sort of gave it away here, that we know the questions before we got them. Sorry to pull the veil back there. One is, I think just by nature, the function itself is sort of conditioned to say yes. And because, there is this concept of wanting to always delight the customer. I don't, for those of you who have heard me speak before or read anything that I've ever written, which it's not a cheap plug. It's not, I'm trying not to boast there, but I've written a couple of articles and done some keynotes around why it is that we shouldn't be aiming to delight the customer. Delighting the customer should be something that is organic and that happens along the customer journey. But if we strive to delight the customer as first and foremost objective, we're not doing anything to really establish that value that makes those customers come back, right? We want customers to come back because they see the value in the solution that you're providing to them. And if they're delighted or happy and just love working with you, that doesn't mean that they're going to spend more money with you. So it doesn't have to be one or the other, but it certainly shouldn't be focused entirely on delighting the customer. However, when, as this industry evolves and grows and we start to realize that we don't always need to hire somebody who comes from customer success. We don't always need to hire somebody who comes from the industry in which we're serving. There can be all sorts of different reasons why you would want to hire outside of a traditional CS background or the industry from which you're serving. I think a lot of people just assume that customer success is about saying yes. In order to delight the customer, you have to say yes. And that can really challenge the CSM, the leaders, the company, the customer themselves to be successful. If we're always saying yes, we're probably not doing the activities that we need to do to ensure that everybody is successful. So I think that that's one aspect that's super challenging, maybe more so than other functions within an organization, is this challenge to always say yes, and or how do you say no in a way that doesn't come across as being standoffish. And related to that is also this seemingly desire to please at every single step of the way, right? And this, I was thinking more about aiming to please as it relates to our cross-functional partners. The way our business is set up internally at LinkedIn is that CSMs don't own the commercial relationship. And so we partner with sales in the post-sales function. And so, you can get yourself into trouble if you're just always, aiming to please. You're really wanting to get that gratification from your partner that you're doing a good job. The way that some CS models are set up is that there is going to always be a healthy friction. And that friction doesn't mean that everyone is always going to be happy all the time. What do they say? The greatest real estate deal is when both people walk away feeling like they got a bad deal, right? It's not to put it in the same context as it relates to how it is that CS should be working with our cross-functional partners, but it kind of is in some respects. So I would say that those are two really unique challenges that I see as it relates to the CSM function, probably more so than maybe some of the other roles. But the important part is being aware of them, right? And then being able to, again, going back to the first thing that we talked about, as it relates to how you present yourself as a leader, and or how all of the leaders in an organization want to move forward, is really just making sure that people understand what it means to delight the customer. Like, don't just throw that term out there without explaining it. I love the disclaimer that Jim put on it. He said proactively delighting the customer. You want to make sure that you're just being really specific as it relates to those two items.
Yeah, I totally agree, 100% everything you just said. And I think the structure of doing things the right way versus just doing things because it'll please the customer. You're saying yes to the customer. Ultimately, for one thing, that doesn't really satisfy the customer in the end, because they're probably not going to get what they need. And then the structure really enables the service to be delivered the way it's meant to be delivered, which is proactive in kind of what Jim was saying. And I think that's ultimately, obviously, what the customer needs, whether they know that or not. That's what they need. And that's what the employer needs of the CSM, because they need the customer to be happy, which eventually happens. So, you kind of alluded to it. I have a bunch of questions, but Mary Alex did ask a question in the Q&A that I think I'd like to bring in now. I think it's a good one. Lots of industrial psychology shows that 3 generations in the workforce today manage their working worlds and relationships uniquely. Can you comment, or please take time to comment around how these current generations, Gen Z, baby boomers and millennials, interact differently in the work environment, and or how you may manage folks differently depending on their ages. And I want to bring that in because it's important, because it's happening. It's true. We're all kind of living that. And it does tie into employee success, because if it's not done, if you don't kind of think about that, those differences, it does affect kind of the overall employee success kind of perceptions. So let's start with you, Perry. Let's go back to, even though you're tired from talking. But.
No. First, I think I know, if I know who this Mary Alex is, then hopefully she understands where I'm coming from. But how typical that the Gen Xer doesn't get called out in the generations that are mentioned in the question. It's very typical for us to be, cast aside. I'm kidding. But yeah, this is, I don't know if this is the only time I've ever worked. So I don't know if this is, I only have my experiences. I don't know if this is unique. in terms of where we are in this particular point in time of the world of work. I haven't done the research on that to understand if there are 4 generations or 5, 4, I guess 4, who are sort of like, crisscrossing at this point in time. For me, it's really just making sure you understand who's on your team, right? And I alluded to this a little bit, and it's a lot deeper than just saying choosing your words carefully. It's not about walking on eggshells, of course. Like, you want to be authentic and genuine, and you want to make sure that the words that you're using are impactful, but you also just want to make sure that your words are as inclusive as possible, and understanding that not everyone is in the same boat. I think for me, it's about just being conscious of who your audience is. I remember at one point in time, there was some feedback that the leadership got around the fact that either everyone was talking about children, and or there were some people who didn't have children, and I can't remember the specifics, but there was definitely some murmuring around kids in the workplace, and people have them, people don't have them. How does that impact your ability to do things before, after, during work? All sorts of complicating factors that, for those of you who have kids, maybe understand. But at the same time, for those of you who don't have kids, you could equally understand it, because we also talk about childcare, but we don't always talk about elderly parent care or family care as well, right? So I think it's just a matter of being conscious of who your audience is, understanding who is on your team, understanding how they learn, understand how they hear. And that just means that you really have to invest in those relationships. The higher you go up the chain, obviously, the least likely you are to be able to understand how Jill in Denver, hears and reads your emails. But that's where you have to, build that into your leadership muscle, and rely on the people who are around you to feed that information back to you. But from my perspective, Mary Alex, it's about understanding your audience.
Yeah, and probably goes back to personal philosophies around having respect for people, regardless of who they are, and trying to understand, what motivates people, and tapping into that. Jim, thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, thank you, Mary Alex, for the question. I feel like it's especially relevant, especially during the last couple of years of our global pandemic. And I think we were going to get into that a little bit anyway. But, the last 2 years of varied levels of isolation affects these different generational, and even from a DEI standpoint as well, just thinking about where folks are at in life and being purposefully tuned in. I think, to Perry's point, as far as knowing the audience, being tuned into not just your direct reports, but to your, extended teammates as well. And truly understanding, that, just taking a few days off here and there to disconnect from work because you're burnt out may not be the answer for everybody, right? Where, it's God, I don't want it to sound bad or anything, but it's sometimes cheap and easy just to make some blanket assumptions based across your employee base that, oh, this is going to help, we're doing a great thing for the team, without really digging in and getting to the root cause of if there is an element of relief, again, in the context of a pandemic where folks are, burnt out or feeling strapped for work, that they can't disconnect and things of that nature. I think there's a lot of relevancy to that, especially, and good call out. But this is just me kind of pontificating on the fact that, just doubling down on what Perry said around knowing your leadership team, knowing the audience, but also, being okay with pivoting and meeting people where they're at, even if it is seemingly a bespoke answer to a specific need. Because at the end of the day, that truly, again, kind of transcends that day-to-day of a typical job experience that they might not otherwise get. Again, that's kind of what keeps people coming back, that kind of like that inspiring element that, hey, I'm not just coming to, LinkedIn. I'm not just coming to ESG for just my day-to-day job. Like, they truly care. And it truly does. These are universal truths. This truly does transcend, again, the day-to-day confines of what would be deemed as just like a job I have to go to. Darn it, Peter. Right. So. Yeah.
I don't think there's any kind of prescription for a leader to apply these kind of actions, depending on which generation you're kind of sitting in front of you. I think it's all about being authentic, I think, and really being mindful and respectful and thoughtful. Leadership's not an easy job, right? And this is just kind of another dimension of it, and it's really important today. Moving on, I want to go to another question further down my list. I already shared with you guys, but what about pace of change, and specifically the pace of digital change and its impact on the work of individuals? And I think this digital change, it doesn't really matter whether you're a small startup or a large, massive enterprise company, been around for the company I was just at, Oracle, for 40 years. I think the pace of change that's being driven by digital is endemic everywhere. I think all companies, to varying extents, are trying to kind of embrace it, exploit it, leverage it, whatever. But what it does is it's driving change in their business. And we can probably all agree that it's inevitable, that the rapid pace keeps escalating. And I think it's because of societal changes too. How does that pace impact your people? And how do you cope as a leader with any associated challenges? Let's go back to Perry.
This is, I mean, all of these questions are great, and we could spend a ton of time. This one in particular for me is just, I don't know. I'm hoping to learn a bunch here from Jim, because I think to your point, Peter, change is inevitable, especially in tech. It's almost like change is what feeds the beast, right? And we to a certain extent, we are slaves to the beast. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But from my perspective, I think companies made a decision at the beginning of the pandemic. Was this the opportunity to say, we are going to double down on the pace of change because of the opportunity that the pandemic affords us? Not suggesting that that's right or wrong, but I think that was a decision that some companies made. We're going to double down or we're going to pull back. And then that impacted sort of employees in different ways. But regardless, change is always going to be somewhat of an anchor to the people who are required to not only enact that change, but also be part of the change. And so for a lot of what we do in customer success, not only are we likely changing as companies quickly, but we're also asking our customers to change as well. Because for the most part, especially in SaaS, what we're doing is our solutions are solving a business problem. And those business problems exist because of something that they are or not doing that our solution can enable them to now do, which requires them to change what they're doing. And so that can be, that's tough. Human beings don't like change. So you've likely got change that's happening in an organization, right? So the employees getting affected by change on their day-to-day, but then they're also asking to be positive change agents as it relates to their customers and taking on a lot of that change management that our customers are going to offload on us and that emotion that comes with it. That's sort of like standard stuff. But then you add in this layer of the pandemic and all of the social unrest that we're seeing, the war, as dramatic as that may sound, the war today. I think change today just is lighting the burnout fuse much quicker. Yeah. It's not only lighting the fuse quicker, but the fuse itself is much shorter. And so I think that A, you have to recognize that. B, you have to be really conscious of when it is that we're going to pause. When is it that we're going to pivot? Any other buzzword that I think a tech company came up with over the pandemic to describe that. I think you just have to be really, really conscious as a leader to understand when is enough. What can we do to help minimize that opportunity for burnout to actually happen before it happens? Because once burnout happens, then things really grind to a halt. And it can be really difficult to sort of, reverse that trend. So from I come here with no answers. I come here with maybe a thought as to what we should be aware of, but I don't know when it is that enough is enough, other than just trying to listen to the employee, my team as best as I can, but also listening to myself. So I'll pause there because I'm not sure that I'm giving you a really great answer other than just sort of. No,
you have very much so. Thanks, Perry. And what you've done is actually, brought to the surface for me there's the leading the team and helping them cope with the pace of change. But then if as you're suggesting, sometimes it means putting a pause or putting the brakes on for some initiative or so, then the challenge for you as a leader is how do you deal with the expectations of the people above you? Right. So you have to be really good at this bi-directional kind of change management implications. Jim, really curious to hear what your thoughts are on this topic of rapid change, digital change.
I may disappoint if Perry's looking for answers from me, but this is one of those scenarios, Peter, where having a collaborative session, opening up the webinar to more of a roundtable discussion. Maybe we can do that for the next one. But
Sure.
That answer in and of itself just kind of popped in my head. I think is part of the answer in and of itself. Having open conversations while change is happening is important, and not just acknowledge it, not just to empathize, but to have an ever evolving plan as it relates to a framework and strategy to really address that change in some of the mystery around that. And I'll be frank, like this goes without saying, but change is hard, right? When you think about just expectation, what that really means with folks, whether it's, the last couple of years with, working from home, where it might sound all fun and games to start, but then, 2 years into it, just the daunting nature of what it means to be isolated to different people that, all walks of life that are either have kids at home and those that don't. And Perry brought that up before, but working from home means different things to different folks. But as life has unfolded, especially the last couple of years, think about how just in my world, how we've, literally tripled the size of our teams. Growing pains are just that. Sometimes they're painful, but necessary to grow in general. And again, I don't want to sound cliche, but that is the reality most times. And we think about truly what that means. It's really difficult to have one without the other. That is change. And when you think about SaaS, like to be in customer success is to experience change. Unless your sellers aren't selling anything, your base is growing, and there's a constant change as it relates to growth and truly how we cultivate and anticipate our customers' needs. And to Perry's earlier point, it's not just about making everybody happy. Like, what does happy mean? It's important, but like, how do you measure that? And sometimes it means presenting solutions that a customer might not even be thinking about without just saying yes to that earlier point. But thinking about just some of the global complexities that we've talked about today, the tool and process complexity as teams continue to grow. I brought this up the last question, but thinking about the importance of scaling smartly, that is not just hiring quickly, but the importance of ops and the process and tools from the cross-functional element piece, especially continuing to motivate folks too during change. Sometimes can be difficult when you think about whether it's cutbacks or hiring, like who are all these outsiders you're hiring, Jim, or are we promoting enough from within? And that careful balance that lies there within, all kind of are contributing factors to some of the ambiguity around this whole change. Who's moving my stuff around? Why is this so uncomfortable all the time, Jim, Perry, or Peter? And it's, again, kind of acknowledging it, having these open discussions are super important. I bring no answers other than getting comfortable with change and hiring folks that are kind of in that same boat that truly embrace that. Those are the folks that truly help teams grow and transcend, and not just within customer success. This is kind of like in my mind, almost a universal truth, as it were. So,
yeah. Oh,
just quickly jump in there, Peter. I love that. Love those comments, Jim. One thing that I think that I wanted to just double down on there is a lot of people will say that they like change, but I'm trying to think of a good analogy here, and I can't. But you really don't know if you like change until you're in the change curve yourself. And I think that a good leader or a good company will give people the opportunity to opt out of that change curve if they realize that this is not working out. And by opting out, I mean it's time to, maybe the option is for you to leave the organization. Yeah. Because that's what's best for everyone involved. Because realistically, for some of the changes that we've gone through, you don't really know that they're not for you until you're in it. So I think that's the difficult part of, one of the difficult parts of leadership is sometimes the right option for an employee to be as happy as they can be is to not be in the organization anymore. That has to be an option. Obviously that's a challenging one, and you want to be gentle. But at the same time, I mean, like sometimes you just need to have that open and honest conversation with someone and just say like, hey, this is obviously not working out for all of us as it relates to, how change is affecting you and or your customer and or us or whatever the case may be. So just something to keep in mind, I think, as it relates to the pace of change and how that can affect employees. It's not about always making them happy or happy in the traditional sense of keeping them. around.
Yeah, I mean, that's the unpleasant part of leading is being sometimes on that side of the desk where you have to have that kind of honest communication with people that might be perceived as really bad. You know, okay, I was going to keep commenting, but there's a question that came up in the Q&A I'd like to kind of look at. How do you manage a direct report who is arguably more experienced in customer success strategy while building out a new team? She wrote, oh, it's anonymous. I'll think we're on the right track and she'll show me I'm thinking too narrowly or stuck in outdated processes, but I don't always have the ability to impact the level of change she's absolutely right about. Sounds like the leader is kind of caught between. How do I encourage her to stay on the team and not get overly frustrated while we try to move towards that change? That change that this individual envisions, but doesn't understand quite why we're not there yet. So you guys understand what the question is? Okay, Perry, you nodded first, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I mean, change is, we've said this 100 times already, change is hard, change is also slow, right? And so one of the most effective things anyone can do to be a positive change agent is to understand and appreciate where other people are on that change curve.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that this person has been gifted an employee that has moved themselves along exceptionally quickly on the change curve, likely because it sounds like they've done this before. So I think the challenge that this person would have to present to the employee who is maybe a little bit anxious about not moving as quickly as they would like is to recognize that while this may not be new for them, it is new and more challenging perhaps than people realize for the company or their customers or whomever it is that is being challenged to change. And that's one of the ways in which you can identify really exceptionally strong change agents, is that not only can they recognize where they are in the curve, they recognize where others are in the curve, and then they can adapt. So that would be my advice for this particular situation, without knowing any more of the details, is to, try and get this person to appreciate that, they're here, everyone else is here, and they wish that everyone was a lot closer to them, and that's just not the case. So how can we work together? Because obviously it sounds like the leader's on board with all the change as well, or maybe they're also a little bit further behind, but how can they team up together and accelerate that path by which everyone gets to the same spot? It may be a divide and conquer. It may be like, hey, you're going to reinforce what it is that I say with your teammates. Yep. It might be like, you lead a session and why this is a great thing. There's all sorts of really creative things that you can do to bring people along that curve. But I think it's having a conversation with that person to get them to recognize where everyone else is.
Yeah, I agree. I think just co-opting them into being part of the kind of the change to lead the change too, either help to evangelize it, help to educate others, would be a way to keep this person on the team. Jim, thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so overlapping themes here that I've been thinking about, especially as of late too, very relevant for me the last year as it relates to some recent hires that I've made on my own direct leadership team. And it's all kind of prefaced under, I'm not saying that this question is relatively, addressing this point, but it definitely does overlap as it relates to just my own methodology with hiring my direct. That is, in many regards, I feel like I'm hiring better talent than myself. And I want to continue to do that because I feel like it's an opportunity for me to learn. So at least from the question standpoint, I would want to ensure that, ensuring that we're, kind of hearing some of that outside perspective. It sounds like there's more experience there. It's an opportunity for that leader who asked that question. I didn't quite catch the name. It's an opportunity to grow too. This is something that I embrace, even if it's something that in general, there is a specific opportunity for me to kind of grow and in general for me to personally spread my wings. And maybe we as a team haven't done things before, or even collectively as an experience, all the experience that we have under our belt. There could be some gold nuggets in there. And I feel like if there is an opportunity to either provide an opportunity for growth for this specific individual, even if it's a special project, but could that change agent help speed up that change in the right ways and inspire cross-functional efforts to transcend the status quo of what's happening on the team? And in my mind, that's us as leaders need to be open to that. It's not just about our way or the highway. Just kind of keeping that level mind openness to be humble and continue to grow. Yes, there's that team element too, but just to kind of layer in just even my own personal philosophies there, like there may be some additional opportunity to ensure that, hey, let's see where this could take us based on this person's past experience. In my mind, the relevancy around being a direct report or maybe having more experience, that's okay. That's okay. It's an opportunity for learning all around, I think.
Yeah, I think you've both given great answers to that question, I think. And I don't remember who said it. One of you said it's basically a gift. I think that's the right way to think about this. Like having someone on the team, sure, it can be a challenge, but it's also can be a gift to you because it can help amplify your efforts to drive change. If you figure out how to keep them motivated and to actually to double down on their motivation and get engaged even further. Let's talk a little bit about performance management systems. I mean, performance management systems, most companies have them, right? How do you kind of rate your employees and hold them to account and provide them with goals and objectives and measure those things? Can that kind of a system help employee success? And okay, well, I'll just leave it there. What are your thoughts on that, Perry?
Absolutely. We leverage a number here at LinkedIn. We have solutions that we provide our customers in this particular regard as well. I'm certainly not the person that would be best to speak to them specifically around all the detail there. So if somebody's listening to this, that's my disclaimer. But from my experience as a leader, they're incredibly valuable because it allows you to provide an opportunity for individuals to deliver feedback, insight, input, however you want to describe it, in an anonymous fashion many times, which can bring out, really great nuggets of information that you might not have been aware of before. I think sometimes there can be a hesitancy from your employee base to understand if they truly are anonymous. From my perspective, they are. So for anybody who is hesitant to believe that what they input in there is anonymous or not, everything that I've seen thus far is to suggest that they are. So I think that they're incredibly valuable tools. But I think that the one of the things to keep in mind here is that asking for feedback is one part of the equation, right? What you do with that feedback is exceptionally important because this is where your employees are going to be watching, right? And not watching in, I don't mean that in a negative way or with any sort of negative connotation, but how valuable is the feedback, or how valuable do I feel when you ask me for feedback? It's great. I feel even more valuable and more heard, more listened to if you acknowledge the feedback and that there's some sort of action that aligns with that. Sometimes the action is just to acknowledge the feedback and say thank you. But more often than not, it's to say, like, this is what I heard, this is what I learned, and this is what I'm going to do about it, right? We call them ACT plans internally within LinkedIn. But I think that that's the important element to any system or any methodology by which you get the feedback or engage your employee base. It's what you do with it, and being transparent and very direct, methodical around how it is that you're going to acknowledge the feedback and then action it when it's appropriate. The reality is a lot of the feedback that we get is something that we, no offense to Jim and myself, we can't influence, right? I can't do some of the things that people would deliver feedback on are well above my pay grade.
Yeah.
But at least I can call that out, and at least I can acknowledge it and make sure that my boss is aware of what it is that my team is saying and encourage her to do the same thing to her boss.
Got it. That's good. Jim, thoughts on performance management systems?
Yeah, just to kind of tack onto that, there's an inherent accountability factor that comes with the transparency, and when there's proper systems in place, and this is the importance of that, and we're still learning quite a bit. And I would feel in some regards we're very much in our infancy in building out some of these systems, but with the proper systems, there's a track record, there's an ability to show progress, and I think the onus is on us. And I'll literally be going through this in a couple hours with our CS all hands some of the output from some of our glint surveys. What is our progress? And it's something that I've really instilled in our leadership, in that, like, guys, this is like, are we truly making a difference? Are we continuing to double down and re-emphasizing that A, we heard you, but B, what are we doing with what we heard? And if there's no accountability there, like, truly, what's the point, especially as it relates to that transparency piece? And I feel like those two go hand in hand. One, acknowledging it, but B, like, showing that track record and progress. And, or, that's assuming things are going well. Sometimes there's output that isn't desirable, or something we didn't anticipate, but that's okay too. I feel like that transparency piece is really important. However, doing a small pivot as it relates to overarching themes and feedback, but thinking about even within our segmented teams and specific roles. Again, there's been some ambiguity historically here as it relates to, not having necessarily a standard way in which we're doing things as a company. And we're evolving, we're getting there. We literally have new programs kicking off next week. But something that I've really challenged my team too is don't wait if something doesn't necessarily exist and or a company sponsored way of doing things, even if it's like a simple scorecard and or a way of tracking like OKRs or MBOs, that you can make it fun. Just identify a couple growth areas or things that you as managers want to kind of drive, but also have input from your direct reports as far as what they feel they can improve on, and track that and have a kind of like a source of truth, as it were, to show that progress. It really kind of transcends a specific system. But again, I think the resounding theme there, and just us literally living that just with some of our systems gaps, don't let that hold you back.
That's great. That's a really good suggestion. Thanks, Jim. We have time left for like one more question. And Mary Alex, I know you asked another question, and I'm not going to address this one, but I suggest I'm happy to engage you offline in this question around company values, and sometimes if they conflict with your own personal values, happy to have a conversation if you want to reach out to me, or I bet you Perry and Jim would mind also helping you with that one. But Danielle Kusler, you asked a question I think is really great. In a CS org that doesn't have any type of leveling structure for CSMs, you find it challenging at times for team members to feel like there is more for them within the organization. While I understand that this is something the organization needs to work on, I'd love to hear thoughts on the best ways to keep an employee happy, looking for that next step where there's not that structure within the company for helping people progress. Thoughts, Perry?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the easy answer, without knowing a whole lot of the details, is to create those different levels, right? Like, which is, not what you're looking for, I realize, but I think it's a lot of times we can get ourselves into a position where we are overthinking it. We try and boil the ocean, but realistically, writing down what the difference is between your, junior CSM, what your, middle tier CSM, and then what a senior CSM would be expected to do, can be an incredibly straightforward exercise, but high impact for the individuals on your team, to be able to give them that level of clarity. I understand that likely means that there is a budget that has to go along with that. And so that's where it gets perhaps a little bit more complicated. But I would say leverage your peers in this particular area. Like, if you're trying to come up with a career profile of what, different levels of CSMs look like, please do not start from scratch. That's definitely something that there's a ton of stuff out there. So that would be one thing. And again, that's probably not answering your question, but just to sort of level set, that's where I would start. But then I would also suggest, if you've identified individuals that are high performing, folks on your team that you don't want to lose, what are some of the things outside of their customer work that you can do, right? Start to investigate, perhaps there's a reduced book of business that this person is working on, and they become, in smaller companies, they become like a pseudo ops person, or they start to work on projects, or they start to think about what scale looks like for your organization, because you're probably not thinking about scale because you don't have enough customers where you think that scale could be useful. So I think there's all sorts of different opportunities that where you can get yourself into trouble there as well, is that you start to do more and more things with this individual that's outside of customer facing work. You lose, in theory, one of your better CSMs, but then you're also asking them to do something more and not paying them anymore either. So it is a fine balance.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, but
I
think aspirationally, those are great ideas. Jim, thoughts on this topic before we close?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on it a little bit as it relates to customer success as a business function, the different roles. And I think even if you're in, I'm not saying that this is where this question was coming from, but even if your CS team is in its infancy, you only have a couple employees, some of the inherent elements of evolving teams, whether it's segment focused, managing a smaller book, things of that nature, there's inherent opportunities for either career growth or for doing different things based on, whether it's expertise or speciality. It's more, put it this way, I feel like there is an opportunity for that, but also not being afraid to have conversations, even if CS isn't that person's long-term passion. We've had that happen, and then it's not unique to Zoom again, I keep saying that, but as we continue to inspire our folks and provide them opportunity, oftentimes we'll find out, like, lo and behold, someone doesn't want to be in customer success for life. And hey, that's okay. That happens. Yeah. Sometimes, cultivating and inspiring someone involves them, kind of leaving the CS nest, as it were. And that's okay too. Not to say that's the perfect answer in every scenario, but at least having that open conversation of finding out directionally where this person wants to go, whether it's within CS and or outside, is certainly healthy and would be appreciated too. So.
Awesome. Great. Jim Mercer, Perry Monaco, we didn't go through all of our questions, but we had some from the audience that were great. Thank you very much for your time today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you guys did too. Thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us. Reminder that you'll receive the recording of this session within 24 hours. And I hope you'll all join us for next episode of Customer Success Unlocked. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye for now.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.